For our final video on the Nancy Drew series, we want to take the lens of cultural theory and apply it and think about how those internal power dynamics are being structured through the use of privilege and justice. So Nancy Drew, as an agent of justice who is attempting to right what she sees as wrongs, can give us some interesting insight into the kind of pushback against the popular conception of adolescence in the early 20th century, while at the same time upholding this sense of an instructional manual for idealized behavior. This gives us a sense then of the adults who were writing these novels and how they were still being influenced by the desire of upholding a certain conceit of social order and hierarchy. Amy Boesky explains that delinquency is as fixed in the world of Nancy Drew as virtue. Bad characters can be captured and punished in these books, and good characters are rescued from danger, but bad people never reform. Criminals do not change in Nancy Drew's world, but instead are revealed. In this sense, the juvenile detective series presumes that crime is an enclosed world from which it is all but impossible to escape, one that constantly threatens, as D.A. Miller puts it, the middle-class world of private life. The malefactors are pushed back to the margins, and the middle class reasserts itself and its central claims on prosperity, property, and guardianship. Now, in the original 1930 version of Secret of the Old Clock, there were additional figures that were pushed back into the shadows as Nancy and the middle-class modernity of River Heights stood as guardians to what was right and just in the social order, and that includes racial and ethnic minorities. In the original editions, minorities were seen as rightfully poor, depicted as incapable of earning or deserving the wealth and prosperity that the Drews and others like them enjoyed. Amy Boesky elaborates on one such racial stereotype in the Topham caretaker, Jeff Tucker. Jeff Tucker is the first in a series of disturbing caricatures of racial and ethnic others in the original Nancy Drews that were edited out of the 1959 revisions. I have reproduced the Jeff Tucker chapter of the original facsimile version if you want to read that to sort of see a little bit of what she's talking about here. But Boesky goes on to say that Jeff Tucker's dialect English and, quote, alcoholic glint in his eye, that Tucker is depicted as deserving humiliation, if not worse. The original text says, "I reckon you's right, miss. Old Jeff done gone and made a fool of himself. I realized that whatever I gets, I's got it a-comin'." So, Tucker's self-reproach here reveals a guiding principle of the series at large. People get what they deserve and deserve what they get. At the mystery's close, the Tophams get upbraided, the kind-hearted middle-class relatives get Crowley's money, goodness and goods are established as self-justifying. The real poor, along with blacks, Jews, and foreigners, get nothing at all. But Nancy firmly reminds her readers that the world of middle-class propriety needs to keep them at bay. Taking Crowley's money from the upstart Tophams, Nancy has rightly restored it to the deserving middle-class families who will put it to best use. Now, of course, these racial and ethnic caricatures have been erased from the 1959 editions, but then so too have race and ethnicity been removed entirely in favor of whitewashed suburban middle-class fantasy in River Heights. But the real question remains in terms of the social order of River Heights. Who is deserving and who is not? What is valued and what is not in the world of Nancy Drew? And how do they get rewarded or punished for their actions and virtues? Now, this would be an ideal time to bring up another concept that's often focused on and criticized when examining Nancy Drew, the concept of privilege. Now, we've discussed already in class the idea of social construction. Privilege, from a sociological standpoint, is an exclusive and unearned social and cultural power that some people gain at the expense of other people. In any social system, you have a system of constructions of normalcy, a series of expectations that are treated as the norm through unspoken agreement, experience, or understanding. This is that social construction we already discussed. Social constructs are any social mechanism, phenomenon, or category created or developed by society. A perception of an individual group or idea that is constructed through cultural or social practice. So we discussed how the concept of childhood is a socially constructed concept, as well as how that applies to other types of identity. Now, because socially defined behaviors or expectations do not always relate to an individual's actual abilities, values, or preferences, social constructions are hard to see. And in fact, a lot of people in society are not even aware of the social system or how the social system affects them. This is where privilege comes from. Because there is a general assumption in society about what is normal, those who don't fit those expectations then become the other, capitalized the other. Privilege is a special advantage, immunity, permission, right, or benefit granted to or enjoyed by an individual, class, or caste, held as a prerogative of status or rank, and exercised to the exclusion or detriment of others. Many people misunderstand the idea of privilege, some going as far as to say it doesn't exist, but let's not make any mistake about it. Privilege is the way human society has always functioned. Those who refuse to acknowledge it are probably misunderstanding the term. Taking advantage of privilege is not always a conscious act. In fact, it's usually the opposite. And benefiting from privilege does not mean that you didn't work for what you have, which is a common argument amongst many who deny privilege. Privilege can be based on gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, social class, physical type and ability, and even things you wouldn't think are significant at all, like allergies, what hand you write with, the color of your hair, what your name is, or sounds like, or spelled like. Everything that makes up a person comes with a set of socially constructed expectations of behaviors. People take from that an impression of you, and they make judgments on it. And those who don't fit those expectations are treated as the other. Let me give you a very simple example of privilege is left and right-handedness. The whole world is set up with the expectation that you are right-handed. Now, statistically, most people are. However, if you are left-handed, you have trouble with spiral-bound notebooks, classroom desks, gear shifts in cars, scissors, all kinds of other very mundane things. Society and the goods that we manufacture is privileging right-handedness, assuming you're right-handed. And if you aren't, well, then you have to work just a little bit harder or create workarounds to make things work. Those who don't fit within the expectation, the burden is on them to make sure that things work. Another simple example of privilege is with allergies. For instance, I am incredibly allergic to cats. My wife has celiac disease, which means she's incredibly allergic to gluten. I know it's not exactly an allergy, but that's how we usually frame it. Now imagine that we're invited to a dinner party. We tell the hosts about my wife's allergy, and they're likely to accommodate. They'll provide an alternative dish, or even buy alternative ingredients, which are definitely more expensive, so that she doesn't feel left out. They'll say, no, it's no bother at all, even though really, I mean, it kind of is. But they also have a long-haired cat, one I've never been around and therefore I'm not used to. I tell them about my allergy. I ask them to put the cat in a kennel for the evening and vacuum very thoroughly. Suddenly I kind of look like a jerk, and I'm likely never to be invited anywhere ever again. People are willing to accommodate one allergy, but not another. So we're clearly privileging one over the other. Nancy Drew enjoys a great deal of privilege in her life, advantages that are unearned, but nevertheless make her more likely to succeed at her endeavors. So comparing Nancy's social situation with that of the Tophams, the Turners, the Hoovers, Abby Rowan, the Matthew brothers, you can see what attributes are being valued. So in the discussion board, we may want to take a look at what aspects of these different people are actually being valued. What's being rewarded? How is it being rewarded? Who's being punished? And how is it being punished? Now, for some final thoughts regarding the Nancy Drew series and this whole week worth of lecture material. The Nancy Drew series is often overlooked by the larger literary world. And certainly we can see previous lectures before spring break about class distinctions and literature. But as you can see, there's a wealth of conversation that can be had regarding the series. Nancy is a cultural icon, not only for children's fiction and the history of children's literature as a medium, but also as a potential feminist icon. So you can see why people think it's very important that we discuss Nancy Drew and have it as part of our consciousness. Now, at the end of this week, you're going to transition into talking about Hatchet. And so next week, we'll be able to look at our discussion board and actually entertain some of these questions, maybe compare it to Hatchet, and think about how different things are being depicted differently. I'll see you next week when we talk about Hatchet and continue to keep it clean.